I never understood why the town clung to that rule. Never stay past dark. It sounded like something a parent would say to keep kids out of trouble. The kind of warning that came with an eye roll and a muttered, "Yeah, sure." But the longer I lived in Hollow Brook, the more I realized the rule wasn't superstition, it was survival. The first time I heard it, Ethan said it with a grin, tossing a basketball against the cracked pavement behind the school. "We don't stay out here past 9, he told me, as if that was just another part of the game. Jake laughed. Will muttered something under his breath, and I thought they were just messing with the new kid. But when the sun dipped behind the pines that first night, their laughter died. Their eyes kept darting toward the tree line. That silence was what unsettled me most. It wasn't the town, with its faded diner signs and endless roads, or even the treehouse deep in the woods that felt too perfect to be real. It was that sudden drop in their voices, like the air itself was listening. I felt it then, a weight pressing against the dark, waiting for us to make a mistake. I thought it was just nerves, just a small-town myth. But the night we broke the rule, I learned why no one stays past dark. The summer we moved to Hollow Brook felt endless. We left behind the hum of city traffic, the neon glow of corner stores, and the background noise of people always going somewhere. In exchange, I got silence. Long stretches of cracked asphalt that bled into dirt, pine trees that towered like watchmen, and a town that looked as though time had stopped 20 years ago. My mother loved it instantly. She said the air was cleaner, the nights calmer, and the people friendlier. My father muttered something about peace and quiet, though his eyes carried the same restless edge mine did. For me, Hollow Brook was suffocating. I was 13 and furious about being uprooted. My friends, my school, even the corner arcade where we wasted Saturdays, all gone. What remained was a town with one gas station, a diner with chipped red stools, and a convenience store that smelled faintly of bait and gasoline. Every face seemed familiar with every other, and I was the outsider, the city kid who didn't belong. The first few days blurred together in unpacked boxes and restless nights. The cicadas never stopped singing, and the silence of our new house was deafening after sundown. I lay awake counting cracks in the plaster ceiling, wondering how long before I could convince my parents we'd made a mistake. Then came Ethan, Jake, and Will. I met them behind the school at the basketball court, where the pavement was uneven and the chain-link fence rattled with every breeze. Ethan was impossible not to like. Messy blonde hair under a Red Sox cap, that easy grin that made you want to follow him even when you shouldn't. Jake was louder, sharper around the edges, with a jaw set like he was always ready for a fight. Will barely spoke at first, his eyes always trailing the ground, but when he did, his words stuck. Together, they seemed inseparable. Like a unit I could never really be a part of, but desperately wanted to be. Ethan introduced me to the treehouse on a humid afternoon. We pedaled through town, our bikes rattling over potholes before ditching them at the edge of the woods. A dirt road curved ahead, tire tracks etched deep like scars, leading us farther from anything familiar. And then I saw it. The treehouse. Perched high in an oak, weathered but solid, it looked like something out of a childhood fantasy. Inside, the walls were carved with initials and drawings, the air smelled of pine and earth, and there were crates that doubled as chairs, flashlights, and the ever-present bag of chips they called rations. It was perfect. And it was ours. That's what they told me. A place off the grid, away from parents and curfews. A secret hideout no one else knew about. For the first time since moving, I felt like maybe I belonged. But even in that refuge, there were shadows. Sometimes a chair would be shifted or a flashlight missing. The boys laughed it off, saying maybe one of us forgot. Still, their eyes flickered with something they didn't voice. And every time the sun slid low and the sky bruised into twilight, their laughter thinned. They'd glance at their watches, pack up in silence, and head home long before darkness settled in.
But I couldn't let it go. I kept hearing his footsteps on that ladder, steady, patient, like he had all the time in the world. Kept hearing the rope creak under his weight, and then I realized something that made my skin crawl. He hadn't come with a weapon. He hadn't needed one. That night he was testing us, measuring the panic, savoring the chase. We were never supposed to survive. The curfew did nothing. Locks did nothing. Because monsters don't live under beds or inside closets. Sometimes they live across the street. Sometimes they mop the gym floor and ask how your day was. Sometimes they smile while they plan where to hide the body. And the rule that once felt like superstition burned itself into truth. Never stay past dark. Not in Hollow Brook. Not anywhere he could be waiting. Because he was still out there, and sooner or later he'd climb another ladder. In the weeks that followed, Hollow Brook tried to stitch itself back together. Curfews tightened, police cruisers patrolled the streets, and parents kept their children close. On the surface, life carried on. School bells rang, the diner served pie, and the gas station clerk still waved at every car that passed. But underneath, fear lingered like smoke that refused to clear. I told myself we were lucky. We had escaped. Jake returned to class, quieter than before. Will drifted further into silence, his eyes always fixed on the floor. Ethan, confined to crutches, barely spoke at all. The treehouse remained untouched, swallowed by the woods, a monument to the night we broke the rule. Yet, luck didn't feel like survival. At night, I lay awake replaying every second, the thud of boots on dirt, the snap of Ethan's scream, the shadow filling the trapdoor. I wondered if my decision to run had doomed the others or saved us all. The guilt gnawed at me, sharper than fear. The police never caught him. They found his truck, found Sarah, found just enough evidence to confirm the worst, but Mr. Harris vanished like smoke, leaving nothing but whispers and the knowledge that he had once stood among us, smiling, waiting. Sometimes, when dusk settles and the cicadas fall silent, I think about that rope ladder swaying in the dark, about footsteps climbing rung by rung, and I hear the rule again, whispered in Ethan's voice, etched into my bones now. Never stay past dark. Because rules like that aren't superstition, they're warnings. And some nights, when the shadows stretch long and the air grows heavy, I wonder if we're still being tested. That's where my story ends, but the fear never really did. Years have passed and Hollow Brook still carries the weight of what happened. People move on, they forget, but I can't. Every creak in the dark brings me back to that night, to the sound of boots on the ladder and the look in his eyes when he found us. Maybe he's long gone. Maybe the woods swallowed him like they swallowed Sarah. But sometimes I feel watched, like the shadows bend just a little too close, like the night waits for me to slip. So, if you ever find yourself in a small town with a rule everyone follows, listen, obey it, because rules like that are written in blood, and once you break them, You don't get a second chance.
That was enough. I didn't think. I lunged for the window, hurled myself into the night air. The ground knocked the breath out of me, pain jolting up my legs, but I scrambled to my feet. Chaos exploded above, Ethan yelling, Jake cursing, Will hesitating too long. One by one, they followed me out. Ethan's ankle twisted under him when he hit the dirt, his scream slicing through the trees. The man dropped down after him, boots slamming the earth with a heavy thud. His shadow rose tall under the moonlight, hood still hiding most of his face. He didn't run. He didn't need to. He just advanced, step by step, while Ethan writhed on the ground and Jake tried desperately to haul him up. I ran. Branches clawed at my arms, leaves slashed across my face, but I didn't stop. The others shouted behind me, tangled in the dark. Every instinct screamed to keep moving, to get home, to get light between me and whatever had climbed that ladder. By the time I burst out of the woods, the town glowed faintly under its street lamps. I tore down the road, sneakers slapping against asphalt, lungs burning. I didn't stop until I crashed against my own front door, pounding until my parents pulled me inside. The words spilled out of me. Truck, man, treehouse, Ethan screaming. My mother grabbed the phone, my father held me upright, and I thought it was over. But it wasn't. The police swarmed the woods within minutes, red and blue lights painting the trees. I stood wrapped in a blanket, my parents at my side, as officers combed through the dirt road. They found Jake first, shaken but alive. Ethan next, pale and broken, his leg bent at a sickening angle. Will stumbled out on his own, wild-eyed and gasping, claiming he had just run without stopping. They never found the man. What they did find was the truck, days later, half submerged in a creek outside town. Inside its trunk, under a tarp, was Sarah, the missing girl, the one whose flyers still fluttered on telephone poles, cold, wrapped in plastic. And the registration papers tied it all together. Mr. Harris, the teacher who smiled at us in the hallways, the one who slipped us candy when no one was looking, the man who told me once that Hollow Brook grows on you. After that night, everything in town shifted. Parents locked their doors earlier. Kids stopped riding their bikes after sundown. A curfew stretched across Hollow Brook like barbed wire. But none of it mattered. Not to me, because I had seen his eyes as he pulled himself through that trapdoor. Shock first, then delight. He hadn't expected us, but once he found us, he wanted us. And I couldn't stop asking myself what would have happened if we hadn't jumped, if Ethan hadn't screamed, if I hadn't run. Would I have ended up in the trunk beside Sarah? The nights after the discovery blurred together in fragments. Police radios crackling, neighbors whispering behind locked doors, and the weight of knowing Mr. Harris was still out there. Every creak of our old house made me jolt. Every flicker of headlights on the road outside felt like they were coming back for me. Sleep didn't help. In dreams, I was back in the treehouse, the trapdoor opening, his shadow stretching across the floor. Then one night, I saw him. I had been sitting at the kitchen table, staring into a bowl of untouched cereal, when motion outside the window caught my eye. Across the street, beneath the skeletal branches of an elm, a figure stood, hood up, hands shoved into his pockets. He didn't move, didn't need to. Even from that distance, I felt it, those same eyes sweeping over me, weighing, calculating. I blinked, and he was gone. The police combed the area again, but there was nothing. No footprints, no sign of a vehicle, just silence. My parents wanted to believe it was imagination, but deep down I knew. He was watching, waiting. The boys and I stopped meeting. Ethan's leg was cast in plaster, his face hollow, his laughter gone. Jake avoided my eyes in the hallway, like saying my name would bring it all back. Will barely came to school at all. The treehouse was abandoned, left to rot in the shadows of the pines.
That was when I first noticed the tension woven into this town. Flyers with Sarah's face stapled to telephone poles, parents scanning the horizon too often, teachers with tired eyes. Nobody spoke about it directly, but the air carried it, the knowledge that something was wrong here, something that lived in the silence after the sun went down. And always, always the rule, never stay past dark. It started with a joke. We had grown too comfortable in the treehouse, too convinced that nothing bad could happen in a place built from wood and laughter. Weeks passed and the rule blurred. Some nights we let the sun sink completely before climbing down, daring each other to stretch the curfew just a little longer. Nothing happened, at least not at first. That was the problem. The silence tricked us into believing the adults were wrong. One late afternoon, Ethan sprawled across an old cushion, grinning like he had already made up his mind. "We should stay the night," he said. His voice was casual, but there was a spark in his eyes. Jake smirked, nodding as if the idea had been his all along. Will leaned forward, nervous but curious, and I sat frozen, the words hanging heavy in the air. I wanted to remind them of Sarah, the missing girl whose face still haunted the telephone poles and the grocery store bulletin board. I wanted to say that our parents' paranoia might have been rooted in something real, but I didn't. Instead, I felt the weight of their stares, the challenge unspoken. If I objected, I'd always be the outsider, the city kid who didn't belong. "Just one night," Ethan pressed. "We've got food, flashlights, sleeping bags. What's the worst that could happen?" The forest outside had already begun to shift. The sunlight fractured into long shadows, the air cooling as though the trees themselves were exhaling. My chest tightened, but their excitement was contagious, a current pulling me into waters I wasn't ready to swim. Finally, I nodded. "All right, one night." That night, I waited until my parents were asleep before slipping out the back door. The town was cloaked in silence, the streets silver under the moonlight. My bike rattled over the dirt road, and up ahead I saw them waiting, 3 silhouettes by the tree line. We grinned like conspirators, as if stepping into the woods together was a pact. The treehouse felt different at night. Shadows bled across the walls, and every creak of the boards echoed too loudly. We set out our sleeping bags, dumped out candy and soda, and tried to pretend it was just another hangout. But when the laughter faded and the stories quieted, the night pressed closer. Then came the sound, the low rumble of an engine cutting through the stillness. Headlights swept across the trees, a truck, old, dented, crawling toward us like it had been waiting. The headlights slashed through the cracks in the floorboards, white beams that seemed to stretch forever between the trees. We froze. For a moment, I convinced myself it was just a parent, someone's dad who had realized their kid's bed was empty. That would have been bad enough, the humiliation of being dragged home, grounded, scolded. But the longer we sat in silence, the less it felt like rescue. The truck's engine cut off. No car door slammed. No voice called up for us to get down. The stillness was suffocating. Jake moved first, crawling toward the window, his face pale in the thin glow of a flashlight. "That's not my dad's truck," he whispered. The words landed like a stone in my stomach. Outside, a door creaked open. Footsteps crunched against dirt. Slow. Deliberate. Whoever they were, they weren't in a hurry. They wanted us to hear them coming. Will clutched his knees to his chest. Ethan gripped the handle of his flashlight like it was a whippin', and I felt my pulse hammering against my ribs. Then came the scrape of a boot on the first rung of the rope ladder. "Guys!" Ethan's voice cracked. The footsteps climbed. Rung after rung groaned under the intruder's weight. When the trapdoor creaked open, a face rose into view. Hood pulled low, features shadowed, eyes darting across the four of us with a flicker of shock, then something else. A slow, creeping recognition, as though he hadn't expected us, but was glad we were here.